Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for the segment, we have Scott Melker, a crypto trader and investor. He's also the host of the Wolf of All Streets podcast and the author of the Wolf Den newsletter. Scott, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's talk about Bitcoin price action. Basically, Bitcoin doing what Bitcoin does. See, we're at some levels we haven't seen in just a couple of weeks. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of weeks in crypto feels like 10 years in any other market, of course. But I think that we're just seeing yet another healthy retrace and correction, which is common, as you touched on, in Bitcoin. Seeing a 10% drop from the top, 15% is just another Tuesday, as we like to sort of joke. I think that we had a lot of hype and excitement about the Bitcoin futures ETF being approved. We saw a multiple month run up of epic proportions. So naturally, the market's going to calm down and consolidate for a while. I'm not concerned at all. I think that we'll see higher prices this year. And like you said, it's just doing what it does.
Right. And, you know, it's so interesting. Sometimes when you watch on media, the excuses that are pulled up to try and justify the movement of what Bitcoin or some of the other altcoins are doing. I mean, I understand there's some of like the meme stock trends are in there and so forth, but some of the headlines are just a little bit crazy trying to justify the moves that Bitcoin makes because of the virtue of what it is.
Yeah, you'd think that by now we would just accept that there's price action largely being driven by traders and that mostly it's a function of liquidation and the liquidations of leverage in the system. And that's what usually we see during these kind of moments of consolidation. We see longs liquidated and shorts liquidated when price is effectively chopping sideways. But yeah, we saw yet another example of Chinese FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, as we like to say in the industry. Very, very minor. And then there were articles about the CFO of Twitter saying that they weren't going to invest in Bitcoin for right now, which seems like a non-event, a non-piece of news, and not even something that was expected. But of course, the media is pointing to that as a reason for this recent drop. Like I said, I think people just get bored and look for narratives when things aren't going up all the time.
Right, which is kind of interesting considering the CEO of Square. We know the story between Square and Twitter.
Of course.
He's been very clear about his intentions with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, Jack is one of the biggest proponents for Bitcoin, I would say, probably on the planet. And Square has invested in Bitcoin, obviously with funds from their treasury. And Twitter and Square, both as companies, have largely gone all in on integrating crypto services into the actual platforms. So whether Twitter decides to put Bitcoin into their treasury or not, that's not the real story. The real story, obviously, is Jack's passion for the asset class and what he's doing, putting his money where his mouth is, so to speak, with actually integrating those services into Twitter and Square.
Let's talk about the infrastructure bill, which was signed this afternoon. And it was interesting because the stalemate behind it really was in terms of miner compliance. What has come out of it when it comes to how miners will be treated under this bill?
Sadly, nothing came out of it. So obviously we saw the initial bill proposed. It had this language about cryptocurrency that was a clear throw-in, right? Not anything to do with the infrastructure bill, another way to raise taxes. Cryptocurrency community went up in arms. There was almost a compromise, but as happens in government, it ended up passing regardless. Without that, went through the House, back to the Senate, and then was signed into law. So it still stands with the very damaging language. The question, though, isn't whether the language matters, it's how that will be interpreted by lawmakers moving forward. I think we all know that they're basically deeming everyone a broker dealer, which means that those KYC rules are in place for people who could literally never enforce those rules, even if they tried. So Lummis and Toomey, the two senators who are very pro-crypto on both sides of the aisle, have already proposed a new bill trying to fix this language yet again. And it goes to Treasury now for them to actually determine how it's going to be read. So I think there's quite a bit of optimism, actually, that everyone knows the language is broken. Everyone knows it's not realistic and can't apply, and that it will be fixed. And more importantly, these don't go into law until 2023, 2024. So we have a really long time before we have to worry about it.
Right. 2.5 years in Bitcoin world is a lifetime, as we mentioned before.
Absolutely.
So Scott, you do a lot of fantastic work with technical analysis as it relates to the asset class. I've had a couple of guests on who've been saying 70,000's around the corner. We'll be at 100,000 at the end of the year. And they have their fundamental reasons why. With the work that you're doing with technical analysis, if you look at some longer term indicators, does it show that it could reach, I mean, 70,000 was right around the corner anyway, but could, continue to, make new levels like that?
Sure. First, I should always specify, as much as I love technical analysis, it's no replace for fundamental analysis or just for common sense and rational thought. And trying to determine what date something is going to happen is somewhat irrelevant if you're an investor with a long time frame in mind. So whether it gets to 98,000 next month as plan B in stock to flow, say at the end of this month, or whether that happens in a year should be irrelevant if you're an investor and you really believe in it. But yes, I do believe that there's plenty of room to grow. In fact, from the perspective of technical analysis, when you break an all-time high and sort of come back to retest it as support, you expect to see blue skies ahead and to see price discovery. So I do have that expectation with Bitcoin, but I just don't know that it's going to happen tomorrow or in 2 weeks or in a month, of course. But I would say that there are very few indications fundamentally or on chain or from a technical analysis standpoint that show that this would be likely the top.
Right. And that's a great point that you make about time frame. Thanks for reminding us of that. And if you did know the time frame, you'd be living on the island of Scott and not joining us on Trade Talks.
Absolutely
Scott,
correct.
As always, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.